So, the basic definition of a biome is a physical environment that has a specific set of organisms or plants and animals that live there that's characteristic of that environment. So, I could say lions live here, and you would automatically know that the biome would be the savanna. So, you have terrestrial biomes, which are basically land, terrestrial is land, and then aquatic biomes. So, those are water biomes. And that's what makes up the earth, land and water. So here are some beautiful pictures of some terrestrial biomes. I would like to go to some of these places. Hint, hint, Mr. Bell. So this is a map of the land on Earth with some different biomes. So you'll notice a few things. First thing I want to point out is that your tropical rainforest is going to be near the equator. Okay, so I don't know if you can see the zero here. Here's your equator. And so your tropical rainforest, and that's this bright color green here, is going to be near the equator. And then as we go up, you see your polar ice caps, and then your tundra. You see the tundra coming across here. And then you have lots of other things. So the first one we're going to talk about is the tundra. The tundra is one of the easier ones for people to remember. So the tundra is pretty much, other than the polar ice caps, going to be the coldest. Not only is it very, very cold, it's going to have high winds and a very, very, very short growing season for the plant life that does live there. One characteristic that you'll only find in the tundra is permafrost. So if you see anything about permafrost, automatically know that it's the tundra. So the tundra, the permafrost, is a layer of subsoil that is constantly frozen. It's permanently frozen. Permafrost, permanently frozen. Okay, so what happens in the tundra is that only the top few centimeters, so like an inch or two, during the summer thaws. Okay, everything else is permanently frozen. And so because of this, the thawed out part of the soil is going to allow plants to grow. So they have to grow very, very fast. The plant life that does live here, they have to grow very, very fast. And they're also going to have shallow roots because their roots are not going to be able to penetrate through the permafrost. So the plants will be very small. They'll be very fast growing, and they'll have very small roots. And then in that few weeks' time where the ground is not frozen and they'll grow, then the ground is going to freeze again and the roots will be crushed, killing the plant. So plant life there is very different compared to some other places. Another reason you don't have a lot of plant life there is because tundra has very low precipitation. Okay, even snow is precipitation. Okay, so it doesn't say this, but I do expect you to know this because I'm writing it in here. Okay, so low precipitation that we compare the tundra closely with the desert. They both have the lowest, they have about the same amount of rainfall. But what happens is the snow that is there, it stays frozen. So anyway, animals, it's very cold, so the animals are going to be adapted to the cold. They're going to have very thick fur, large stores of fat or blubber to keep them warm. You will not have any cold-blooded things. Cold-blooded is ectothermic. Okay? So cold-blooded things are going to be reptiles, amphibians. They will freeze to death. Ectothermic, if you remember, cold-blooded means their temperature depends on the outside temperature, on the environmental temperature. You are warm-blooded. So, it's too cold here for anything cold-blooded to live. So a sample food chain would be grass, and then rodents eat the grass, and then owl eats the rodent. Okay, so you also might find things like polar bears or Arctic foxes and stuff like that here. So when you're thinking about the tundra, you need to think like Alaska. Okay, that's going to be mostly tundra. So if you're thinking about the tundra biome and you want to compare that to a movie, you can think of Happy Feet. So in Happy Feet, very cold, lots of snow, and you're not going to have any trees in Happy Feet. So here would be a picture of the tundra. So the first thing that you need to look for if you're identifying tundra is trees. If there are no trees and you see all this snow, it's probably the tundra. If you see snow and there are trees, then it is not the tundra, because the tundra will not have trees. It does not have enough rainfall to support trees, and because the permafrost, trees will not grow there because the roots will not penetrate the permanently frozen soil. So the taiga is where it would be really cold and you would have trees. Okay, so the taiga is also known as a coniferous forest. So they're going to have conifers or trees with cones. So the taiga is known for having very cold, harsh winters, but they have kind of cooler summers. The taiga is gonna be more hospitable to plants because it has plenty of rain. So again, this is where you will actually have trees. So it's cold with trees. It's gonna be the coniferous forest, also known as the taiga. Because you have plenty of rain to support trees, you're also gonna have a lot of plant life, which means more plants, more producers, more animals. Now, you're still going to have animals that are adapted to the cold. They're going to have insulation with a heavy fur or fat because it's still going to be very cold. This is also where you'll have animals that will hibernate during the winter. So a food chain could be a tree, then a beaver, then a bobcat. So taiga, bears are going to live here, things like that. When you think about the taiga, you need to be thinking about like Canada. It's going to be really cold. Some parts of the U.S. are going to have taiga, not very many. Up towards the top of mountains, like mountainous regions, a lot of the times will be considered taiga. So if you're thinking of the taiga or the coniferous forest, the first movie that comes to mind for me is going to be Frozen 1 or 2. Of course, y'all know my daughter loves the princesses. Everyone always wants to say Frozen is the tundra, but it's not, because remember, there are trees there. Okay, specifically, you see lots of conifer trees. So if you remember one specific instance where Anna, before she meets Kristoff, there's a tree and then the snow falls on her, and then she gets soaking wet and cold, and that's before she goes to Okansana, whatever his name is. So here is some pictures of the tundra. I noticed a little bear, and that's a picture of a beaver that didn't come across very good. Anyway, notice we do have snow, but you still have trees too. So then you have the deciduous forest, or the temperate forest, or temperate deciduous forest. So this is where we live, and this is also most of the eastern United States. You're going to have conifers, but you're also going to have deciduous trees. So deciduous trees are those trees that lose their leaves, and they leaves fall in the fall. So in the winter they have no leaves. So like oak trees here. Pine trees are going to be like conifers. You have lots of plant life and trees because there's plenty of rain. The forest floor is going to be covered in humus, which is a decaying organic matter. So that makes us have very fertile soils, which means there's a lot of crops that are grown here. The deciduous forest has 4 distinct seasons. Now, before you think, oh no, it's just hot here all the time, if you go into Jackson, Mississippi, which is not much further north from here, you really will feel 4 distinctive seasons, especially if you get like into Tennessee. You'll see 4 distinctive seasons. We are kind of more towards the edge, getting out of the deciduous forest, and we do live on the coast too, so that impacts our weather, but we're still considered deciduous forest. So you have lots of plant life, lots of trees. That means lots of animals. So a lot of biodiversity here. So this is, like I said, this is going to be where we live. Lots of movies are filmed in the deciduous forest. The first one that comes to mind for me is Bambi. But that's just me. So here is a deciduous forest picture. So then you have grasslands. Grasslands actually make up the biggest part of the United States. So that's like all the middle of the country over onto the west coast. Grasslands do contain fertile soil. They have a moderate amount of rainfall, and they have pretty cold winters, but very hot summers. So they have a big difference in temperatures. It's called a grassland because they're covered by grasses. They do not have trees because they do not receive enough precipitation. Those grasses that they're covered in are very resistant to drought and cold, and they do have fires, but they're resistant to fires, which they will come through occasionally, but they are resistant to fire. Anyway, so grassland covered in grasses, no trees. So a food chain is going to be like grass, and then your prairie dogs, coyotes, which coyotes can live in lots of places. But if you think about the prairie, that would be a grassland. Lots of movies come to mind. Of course, I think Little House on the Prairie automatically. But anything kind of like Oklahoma, Kansas, parts of Texas, any of those type places. So I think of Wizard of Oz. You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. So here are some pictures of a grassland. So you've definitely seen pictures like this in the United States. There's your little prairie dogs, the buffalo. Okay, the chaparral. The chaparral is actually not a big biome that we see very much of. A lot of people get the chaparral confused with the desert because it can kind of be very dry. So they have hot and dry summers, but mild, cool, and rainy winters. So because of the cooler, rainy winters, they are not the desert, because the desert has very low rain all year. So the chaparral biome is going to be considered a shrubland. So rather than grasses, it's covered with shrubs. So this is going to be parts of Southern California. So they're going to have insects, spiders, lizards, snakes. And so here's a food chain for you. And when I think of, there's lots of movies filmed in Southern California. The first one that comes to my mind that I've watched recently is San Andreas with The Rock in it. But anything filmed in San Francisco or something like that, LA, that's going to be shrubland. So we don't have a lot of that in the United States. Anything with the Wild West, like if it's a Wild West type movie, it really could be considered chaparral, but it also may be considered the next biome we're going to talk about, the desert. Desert. I think deserts are pretty easy to recognize. They are most known for their low rainfall, but I want to remind you that the desert and tundra have about the same amount of rainfall. So they are most closely compared to the tundra, the desert is. So because they have a lack of rain, they have a lack of plant life, and that leads to a lack of animal life. So the desert and the tundra are going to have the least amount of biodiversity or amount of species compared to all the other biomes. Now, one thing deserts are also known for, well, you have hot deserts and you have cold deserts, and we're not getting real specific into it, but a lot of deserts are going to be real cold at night and very hot during the day. So there's major temperature changes with the desert. And so organisms that live there not only have to be adapted to the very dry conditions, but they also have to be adapted to extreme temperature changes. Plant life that will live there are usually cacti and succulents because they're able to store water because, they have to live in the dry conditions. There's not a lot of plant life. The soil is not really fertile. The soil doesn't get fertilized very well because there's not a lot of plants and animals living there to help put nutrients back into the soil. The plants will also have very deep roots because they have to go deep in order to absorb nutrients and water. Examples of animals that would live there would be like bobcats, mountain lions, owls, hawks, antelope, sometimes sheep, rats, snakes, lizards. So anyway, when I think about the desert, the first thing that comes to my mind is the movie Rango. But there's lots of desert movies, of course. So like I said earlier, anything with Wild West would also be kind of desert or chaparral, just depends. They kind of go between the two, but I automatically just think of Rango. So here's a picture of the desert. Savanna. So the savanna is basically a grassland with small clusters of trees and shrubs. So a true grassland is not going to have any trees or shrubs. The chaparral is not going to have trees. It's going to have mostly shrubs. So savanna is kind of a mix. It's going to have grass, lots of grasses, but some small clusters of trees and shrubs. So the savanna is going to be usually pretty warm. They're going to have seasonal rainfall. So they'll have like periods of the year where they just have thunderstorms like every day. And with those thunderstorms comes a lot of lightning, and that lightning does typically begin fires. Wildfires. Anyway, so this rainfall is very seasonal. Very warm. The herbivores, they have lots of herbivores because of all the grasses and stuff. You have lots of herbivores that live here, and the herbivores are very important. These are going to be this is where your zebras, giraffes, antelope. You're also going to have lots of insects like termites, birds, ostriches, storks, eagles can live here. And then your carnivores are going to be lions, leopards, jackals, hyenas. And so this should be very familiar to you. When you see savanna, you should automatically think of the Lion King. Okay, so the Lion King would be savanna for sure. So anyway, leopards are another thing. So with the Lion King, you think about Rafiki, and when Simba meets back up with Rafiki, he's in the tree, and Rafiki hits him on the head. If you remember that part, Rafiki has this one little tree that Rafiki lives in. So there's your small cluster of tree for the Lion King. Now, there are a few parts in the Lion King where you get into where Simba meets up with Timon and Pumbaa. That would be really the desert. And then they go into a forest type area that really kind of looks more like a rainforest. So if you think of Africa, Africa can have all those different biomes in one area. So these savanna could be found in Africa, South America, the Middle East, and the savanna can also be in Australia. So here is the beautiful savanna, and we see our elephants here, our lions, our hyenas, our zebras and giraffes, and lots of animals that we see. Sorry, that's Lucifer, my dog. So the next thing we're going to talk about, or the last terrestrial biome, is the tropical rainforest biome. So the tropical rainforest, when you think about it, is going to be the most colorful biome. Okay, if you're thinking about colorful, because it's the most biodiverse terrestrial biome. And what that means is that it has more species than every other biome combined. Okay, and the reason why is because it receives lots of rain. It's a rainforest. Okay, so because it receives lots of rain, that means we have lots of producers. Okay, so if you remember when we talked about food webs, if you have more producers, then you have more consumers. So this biome has the most rain out of all the terrestrial biomes, and the temperatures are fairly constant, fairly warm, because it's near the equator all year. So you have kind of a very stable, a generally stable environment. So these organisms are going to be very adapted to live here, and they're also not in a big, majorly changing environment unless humans come into play. So you have lots of plants and animals here. And so they have more species than all other biomes combined. A lot of the times whenever they are finding new species, a lot of the times it's in the rainforest because humans don't typically, in the the actual forest, researchers go out there and they're constantly finding new things. So anyway, the tropical rainforest, it is a forest. So it has a canopy of about 210 feet high. That's the tops of the trees. And below that canopy, you're going to have major plants that are major shade loving. They're shade plants. And you can go to like Lowe's and buy these, and they'll actually be indoors. And they'll need total shade. So these are like orchids and bromeliads and ferns. So a lot of people put ferns on their porches because the porch is shaded. Anyway, you have lots of insects, butterflies, ants, beetles, just tons of different insects. Piranhas would live here. That should say reptiles, so like your boa constrictors, anacondas. Lots of amphibians are going to live here, like the brightly colored poison arrow frogs. If you ever think about anything real brightly colored, it probably lives in the rainforest. All the beautiful brightly colored birds like parakeets and parrots, and like toucans and things like that are going to live in the rainforest. Herbivores are going to be like your sloth. Sloths live in a rainforest, so that's very distinctive animals. Monkeys, jaguars, anteaters, those things are going to live in the rainforest. So when I think about a movie for the rainforest, I automatically think of Rio. And that's the one with all the birds and they're singing. It's a really cute movie, if you've ever watched it. But anyway, another movie you can think of for many of these terrestrial biomes is Zootopia. Gemma calls that the bunny movie. But anyway, she loves Zootopia. And so in Zootopia, you will visit multiple biomes. And there's the part where the bunny in the beginning is going to the big city. And it actually tells you which biome they're going through. And they visit the tundra, and then they visit the rainforest at one point. And anyway, the savanna. So they go to all these different biomes in Zootopia. So here is a picture of the tropical rainforest. So you can see these are organisms that are very distinct for the rainforest.